thank you. My first presentation today is on narrowbanding. We are now less than 1 year to go, and so we wanted to provide another update to the Commission today on where things stand in Arizona and the progress that's been made and some of the challenges that we have to meeting the narrowband deadline before January 1st of next year. I will preface all of this presentation with, we're not actually going to go through every one of the slides here because we know we've talked with you an awful lot about narrowbanding. And there are an awful lot of references in this slide to online resources. So the presentation was designed in mind both for you today, but also to be a resource online for people to go and find out more information. But I'm going to do just a brief overview on narrowbanding, where we stand from a national standpoint, where Arizona stands, and some of the options for meeting the mandate and cost considerations, those types of things. Obviously, this narrowbanding we're referring to is the VHF-UHF narrowbanding from 25 kilohertz down to 12.5 kilohertz. This has been delayed numerous years, and we're now set January 1st, 2013. The FCC has said over and over again, this will not be moved. Last July, the FCC issued public guidance on how to request a waiver, and they actually have asked that waiver requests be sent in by the end of 2011. Therefore, anyone or any systems that do not believe they're going to meet this deadline need to have their waivers submitted as soon as possible. They should immediately contact the FCC's Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau, and again, that link is clickable to begin the process of informing them. One thing I would mention is that they have stated in several national meetings that the waiver process is not going to be a routine approval process. They expect to see project plans for how the mandate will be met. They expect a deadline for when you'll be able to make it. They expect to see your proposed funding for it. One of the key things that we've been hearing in national presentations is the lack of funding is not going to be considered a viable reason for delay. If it's simply a matter of you've got the funding but it's over the next 2 years, they'll look at that. But simply not requesting funding and not taking advantage of the last 10 years worth of budget cycles and grant cycles is not going to be a valid reason for approval. The consequences for failing to meet the deadline, and again, this is something the FCC has consistently been discussing, $16,000 for each violation, $112,500 for any single act or failure to act. The complaint or the violation process from the FCC standpoint is going to be complaint-driven. When a license begins to interfere with another license that's been granted authority to operate on narrowband spectrum next to the wideband spectrum, and if you're causing interference, then and a complaint is filed, then they will go out and begin enforcement action. The FCC does not want to have to go through the process of revoking licenses because that involves hearings on their part. Whereas by going through the enforcement and fine operations, they can move a little bit quicker on that. From a national progress to date, beginning back in July 2010, you can see that from a narrowband only status, the column on the far right there, we're less than 15% of the nation was in that narrowband only, and less than about 13% were modified their license to be both wideband and narrowband. Moving forward, you can see that's kind of gone up there. We're about 20% now nationally are narrowband only, with another 32%, 33% that are in transition. So less than 46% of the nation has not even begun the process. But again, that's almost 50% of the nation has not even started the narrowband process of requesting license modifications. One of the factors I do want to call out, if you notice, the total number of licenses also continues to drop. one of the reasons for that is we're seeing a lot of systems migrate from UHF or VHF to digital systems or 7800 systems. So that's why you'll see that decrease, in particular, big decrease over the last several months. From Arizona's standpoint, we're doing a little bit better than the national trend, at least in terms of making progress. Only 16% of Arizona is now completely narrow-banded, but we've got another 54% that are within that transition. So less than 30% of the public safety VHF, UHF systems, and this is only public safety that I'm referring to here, or public safety licenses, have not begun the process. So we're making progress, but as you can see from the map, there's still an awful lot of red there. Kind of the breakdown here by region, Central East, etc. Overall, it's roughly equivalent. The Central region, and I should indicate, since it's probably not completely obvious here, that does not include the RWC, TRWC systems. Those are 7-800. These are simply all the other systems within this region that do not operate on those 7-800. But yeah, overall, solid progress, particularly from the eastern and western racks, or excuse me, regions. Wrong governing body. This is the standpoint in terms of the number of transmitters. Again, a lot of the transmitters we're making much better progress on. So beginning in January, 1st of January, we sent out a survey to all license holders in the FCC database and requested a fairly high-level survey, about 13 questions, asking about the status of their narrowbanding, what their plans were they going to request a waiver, had they received funds. We got back 115 responses by the end of January. I will indicate, as you see below, that this was not a scientific survey. It was much more of an informational type of survey standpoint. There are a tremendous more number of different public safety agencies I get responses from. But from a high level, fairly good progress being made on the status of narrowbanding from the respondents. The nice thing about this is the high number of people indicating that they have either completed or they're somewhere in the implementation phase. And we did define implementation phase as they've begun the planning process, they've gotten funding identified, those types of things. Planning down there, and again, that's a rather high number. From a planning standpoint was, if they haven't yet identified a funding source to be able to begin the narrowband process, then they were still at the planning phase and not in the implementation phase. A couple of people had not started or had already identified that they were not going to be able to make the process and were working on their waiver. And a couple of people that responded to the survey that were 7-800 systems and therefore didn't need to narrowband. Not going to bore you through with all of the details. The key issue there, from our perspective, was there were two agencies that do plan on requesting the waiver. What was more of a concern to us, though, was the gap there between the number of agencies who were planning on requesting a waiver versus the number of agencies who are still very early on in the process. We're running out of time to have this completed, and so that, if 50% of folks are still in the planning phase, we strongly encourage them to begin the waiver process as well in case they're not able to complete everything by the deadline. But overall, a fairly large chunk of identified source, roughly source of funding for the conversion, about 10% is not yet. Another area of concern for us, though, was that roughly over half the respondents did not have a documented migration plan. And a project as big as narrowbanding, that's somewhat of a concern. Just more pretty charts and data. I got to kind of skip through this because we're going to see a lot of charts today. But the main concern here is for those that were early on in the process, did they think they'd be completed by the January 1st deadline? Two of them said they're going to submit a waiver, and four are saying they're not going to make it, but they will submit a waiver. And one agency reported that they do not intend to submit a waiver. In order to meet the mandate, there's a couple of options moving over to 7-800 systems. There's a variety, and this may be more of an option in areas where YRCS has a presence, TRC, TRWC, RWC, etc. Continuing to reprogram the equipment. Narrowband capable equipment has been out on the market for a significant amount of time, so most agencies should already have that narrowband capable equipment, and it's a matter of reprogramming it to narrowband mode. And of course, moving over to digital systems. I'm going to skip through kind of the considerations for narrowbanding there, but these are just kind of the high-level stuff. Mainly, don't forget about pagers and other non-voice type radios that the agencies might also be using. Cost and funding. While it does not require a complete system upgrade, there can be substantial costs related to narrowbanding, and as I've said a couple of times today, those considerations need to be taken into account. Regular budget cycles, grant cycles, etc. Most grant funding now at the federal level that involve interoperable communications do make a provision for narrowband-related activities. Everything from planning, replacement of the equipment, consultants to reprogram the equipment, even the licensing kind of costs. So the federal government, through the Office of Emergency Communications and SAVECOM, has updated their guidance. In the last several years, narrowbanding has been an allowable cost within a variety of different grant programs, not just Homeland Security, but some of the other grant programs as well. On the FCC's narrowbanding website is a link to a lot of the other different potential funding sources. One of the things that I'll mention is that we're really at the end of that cycle. And if agencies are considering applying for grants to help with narrowbanding costs, they need to take into account when the money will actually be awarded and how much money is going to be left in the year in order to get that done. As I said, the federal 2012 grant guidance allows under three different priorities, identifies narrowbanding from a planning perspective, an equipment perspective, and even the integral emergency communications activities priorities. So there are a number of different priorities available to which you can apply for narrowbanding costs. But I should note that some grants don't allow construction activities under them, so you need to carefully look at the specific grant guidance for that grant you're applying for. As Lisa Hansen mentioned earlier, March 2nd, 5 p.m. is the deadline for the State Homeland Security Grant Program. Whole bunch of links here in the presentation, and of course on Homeland Security's, State Homeland Security's website on the 2012 Homeland Security Grant. Moving forward, narrowbanding obviously is the responsibility of the individual licensee, but as a commission tasked with supporting interoperability and systems that are designed for operability, we wanted to make sure that we kept you aware of the progress, and that we're going to continue to conduct outreach on this and reach out to a lot of the different systems. Within our agency, our project oversight personnel outside of our office have been working with other state agencies on their narrowbanding plans and on moving those projects forward. And we encourage systems to continue this process, and if they need help, to call our office to contact the FCC if you are likely not to reach that January 1st deadline. It's much better to have that waiver request paperwork in their basket than it is to come around on January 1st and have the complaint filed against you. With that, number of resources in the presentation from our office, the FCC, the public safety tools.info has now been updated with all of the different charts that were part of this presentation are generated from their tool. That's also useful for helping planning. Several of the other different agencies and their grant programs that might be able to help. In particular, I want to call out the USDA Rural Development Community Programs. There are a lot of communities within Arizona that can take advantage of that grant program. So we strongly encourage you to look for sources beyond just state homeland security if you're looking at your narrowbanding. The FCC's contact information. And with that, I will open it up to any questions the Commission may have. Director Onsky.
Joe Ronke, Affairs of Homeland Security. Thank you for your presentation. I'm looking at the numbers there. Is this just budgetary? Is that why it looks like most of the country is sort of in the same position?
We're hearing a lot of both. I know that some agencies, it's been a matter of coordination. For them, it's been a rather complex process. I've been speaking with Michael Mills with Rural Metro, and they're having to deal with it from a nationwide standpoint on upgrading, and so it's taking them time to get through that process. Some of it is simply a matter of we have until December 31st, and we're going to build our project plans through December 31st. But some of it is narrowbanding. We're hearing from some agencies, particularly in rural counties in Arizona, that the funding is not there, and they're looking at complete system replacement. We strongly encourage to look at all the options, not just system replacement, but possibly joining some of the other regional systems that are already in place and ready to go.
Thank you.
But unfortunately, it really is a mix of some not ready, some that are taking up full time, and some that are just complex projects that are going to take a while.
Other questions? Any questions from the phone?
No.
I have a this commission is part of interoperability and operability, so narrowbanding isn't clearly within our bailiwick, and we've never been given the money to solve this problem. However, in January 1st, 2013, or shortly thereafter, when some of our public safety brethren systems start getting either shut down or highly penalized by the FCC in this, they're going to be looking for some answers, and over here for some answers as well. So I think it is important. We're continuing our outreach efforts and our education efforts, but fundamentally, to your question, what we're seeing is a lot of people out there who were saying just for years, they'll push back the deadline, they're not going to make us, they'll never shut us off, they'll never fine us, a lot of this sort of attitude. And, the FCC is not, they're playing hardball. They're just, we have to get this done, and we wait long enough, and it's going to get done, and that means we're going to have to, have very serious consequences for some people. But I'm very concerned about this, and I think that the survey results, 115 out of 600 or so public safety agencies, is probably certainly not representative, and I think the ones that answer are probably the ones that are actually on top of things, and the ones that didn't are the ones that are not. Very concerning that, 46% or something like that is not done yet here in the state. We're not going to get there, and we're going to have a lot of problems. And so I do think that we need to consider what kind of briefing we need to do for the governor's office and others at the legislature so that they realize that it's happening and they don't all of a sudden just wake up and dawn on January 1st and go, why didn't anybody tell us? Because we've obviously, to some degree, the state agencies have been telling them it's the budget issues that's gone through the legislative process for correction, CPS, and others. But as a statewide problem, and we're not, as you said, we're not alone. We're going to see it all over the nation. But I do think that in some of the areas, like, for example, with PC Wind. Do we have an updated status on what our PC Wind's waiver? Fundamentally, if you have an entire region that has a significant dollar figure behind a build-out that's going to eliminate this problem within a year or two, I think they have a better chance of going after a waiver than, Joe, agency, public safety agency, who's sitting in the middle of 10 others that have all done narrowbanding, and now you're going to have interference problems, and they're going to have a lot harder of a idea to say, well, everybody around you did it, and you're now interfering with all your neighbors. They are actually going to technically change your license on this date, and you're going to be, from that date, no longer operating within your license. And the penalties are going to be, it will be a driven complaint process, as described, but you will be out of licensure at that point. They're not going to wait and, see if you apply to change. If you haven't applied to change, you're automatically getting changed, and at that point, when you start operating outside of your license, you'll be operating outside of your license. So it's pretty serious.
So, Lisa, let's definitely set up a meeting to brief the governor's office.
Mr. Chairman, Chief Campbell, I share the same concerns here, and the hurry-up rush process that I know your office has done, Lisa, has done a very good job of outreach in conjunction with the Homeland Security to make these conferences and seminars and educational processes available for folks to understand what's going on. I'm just hoping, here like in today's meeting, we have two different issues about narrowbanding. Still exist, and we're talking to the 2013 deadline is PHF narrowbanding, where we filed a report with, Director Felix is 700-800 megahertz narrowbanding, and I'm hoping that there's not a confusion there, but I know you guys have all done a great job in putting out those information panels, information flyers, and it's been on a regular routine agenda item here.
Dan Wells had a comment.
Thank you, Dan. Please.
Just also in passing, one thing I hear as in my travels is several months ago there was a House bill introduced out of one of the representatives of New Jersey to push the narrowband deadline back 2 years. I was in Trenton a couple of weeks ago. That bill is deader than dead. It has no co-sponsor, and it was attached to a bill that was guaranteed to die. So if any of that conversation gets out there, that gee, this might happen, that's not going to happen. That bill is cold dead.
Thank you, Dan. No, everybody in the room is nodding in agreement. Any other questions for Justin? Thank you very much, Justin.